Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy and honored to be here amongst all of you amazing scholars. I come bearing Klaus's tremendous regret for not being able to come. He is so ill with the flu, his doctor won't let him leave his house, much less the country. So I have some pretty big shoes to fill, but I know he would be happy to be here if given the chance. I will be presenting his talk, The Ideal of Art and the Ideal of Service, about the Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C. In 1920, Duncan Phillips described his aims for the Phillips Memorial Gallery, set to open the following year, as the idea to which the unique collection is consecrated is that of a dual fiction and purpose, the concept of a small, intimate museum of the world's best art, combined with an experiment station where living and constantly developing artists can show the results of their research and their aesthetic adventures. The Phillips opened as the first museum of modern art in the United States in 1921 in the DuPont Circle neighborhood of Washington, D.C., far from the city's monumental core. Instead, it's in a residential and Embassy Row neighborhood. We can actually see the 1897 house building on the left, the Go Annex, which was created in the 1960s, just next to it. And then just past the flowered tree, there's the Sant building that was built in 2000. So we've sort of taken over the block as we've grown and expanded throughout the years. The Phillips today builds on the foundational principles that Duncan laid out in his 1920 remarks. We continue to collect art not because we have great funding reserves or even federal support, as we are a private institution, but rather we collect art thanks to the generosity of our donors and the relationships that we've cultivated with private individuals and corporations. Contemporary art remains a strength in our collection. Big, small, and even one-on-one installations of contemporary artists are what define our exhibition programs throughout the year. We're also committed to innovative partnerships, such as an affiliation with the University of Maryland in the nearby state of Maryland, and the ARC, which I'll speak about in a minute. And finally, we're dedicated to our service to the community, especially underserved populations living in parts of the city far from our original home in DuPont Circle. And we do this through a newfound commitment to diversity and inclusion, trying to give voice to people who were perhaps voiceless before. So here we see young Duncan Phillips on the right and on the left with his brother, Jim. The two brothers grew up in the 1897 house building, but the family originally came from Pittsburgh. They made their money in the steel industry like Andrew Carnegie. Jim and Duncan went to Yale together, but Duncan was very impatient with the inadequate art history that was made available to him. He founded the museum as a way to sort of rectify the educational deficits that he felt he had during his time at university. But he founded the museum primarily because of Jim's premature death in the 1918 Spanish influenza outbreak. He created this public space for the healing power of art's formal and even synesthetic qualities. In fact, the Phillips Collection's first name was actually the Phillips Memorial Gallery in memory of Duncan's brother. So I'd just like to point out the iconic Renoir's Luncheon of the Boating Party in the center of the historic photograph of the main gallery on the right. And you'll see that it's actually in dialogue with watercolors by American artists. Duncan Phillips really believed in matching synesthetic and formal qualities of works of art rather than try to create a narrative based on schools or stylistic developments. Rather, he wanted to have fluid juxtapositions of artworks across movements and across geographic places to highlight the contemporary artists around him. So essentially elevating contemporary artists by associating them with more established artists, often from Europe. We tried to keep the museum just as dynamic and fluid as Duncan did back in the 1920s. This is what you first see when you walk into the museum, this nice welcome wall right here. What you can't see is to just the left of this wall is a wall of framed archival objects from yesterday and today. So highlighting people, places, exhibitions, and even their notes to animate the visitor's experience as they walk in. We can't take for granted that people know the Phillips Collection's history, so this is our way of sort of inviting people into the living room of the home that it once was. It's worth noting that the design concept for this area was actually driven by a collaboration with undergraduate design students at the University of Maryland. This was the result of an assignment they had for their senior project. So a lot of these students' ideas informed the space in this museum. As you can see, we're not the largest museum in Washington, but we do tend to punch above our weight. We try and keep an exciting exhibition schedule going year-round. We're aggressive in our fundraising efforts in order to continue to collect and put on the programs that we're so proud of. So we work hard, and we are small, but we punch above our weight. To further explain our commitment to emerging and established contemporary artists, Klaus wanted to point out a few notable artistic collaborations we featured over the years. We work with both important emerging and established artists in the spirit of Duncan's sort of idea of playing these more established and younger artists off of each other to raise each other's profiles and have us sort of think about art and art history in new, innovative ways. So if you look on the bottom left, we see a work of art created by Enrique Martinez Celaya. It's in dialogue with Albert Pinkham Ryder's work on the right. Celaya's work was actually dedicated to the Phillips Collection in honor of Klaus. And the work is inspired by the writing of Kierkegaard. So Celaya was offered the opportunity to sort of pick an artwork that he would have hanging opposite of his own to create a new dialogue. So he chose the equally dark, somber, and brooding pictures by the American artist Ryder. But you'll also see that we featured exhibitions, monographic exhibitions by top-shelf contemporary artists such as Hiroshi Sugimoto and George Kondo. Both artists actually worked very closely with Klaus Altmann. So there is this really close relationship that we like to foster between our curators and the artists that come and show at the Phillips. The Kondo show is now actually up at the Louisiana Museum in Denmark. So just to give you a sense of the international scope of our exhibition programming. We frequently feature these dialogues between contemporary artists and works of art that are already part of our permanent collection. This extends not just to global artists, not just to New York-based artists, but even some Washington, D.C.-based artists as well, such as Lynn Myers, whose Intersection installation is dialoguing with Vincent van Gogh's The Road Menders from 1889. On the right, you'll see Arlene Scheket, a sculptor who chose works from the permanent collection that she wanted to juxtapose with her own work, which is sometimes ceramic, sometimes paper. She recently had a show at the Frick where her works were in juxtaposition with Meissen porcelain. So here she's changing things up a little bit by creating a challenging dynamic between her sculptures and a painting by Morris Louis, who is also a Washington artist. True to Phillips's original plan in the 20s, we still believe in innovation and creating immersive experiences in the spirit of the museum's founding as a place for contemplation and healing. On the left, you'll see Wolfgang Leib's Where Have You Gone, Where Are You Going? The first and only permanent in situ wax chamber in the United States. This is the result of a decades-long relationship between Leib and Klaus Altmann. Klaus actually authored Leib's first major show in the United States that traveled to various venues across the country. That sort of one-on-one relationship is so special to us at the Phillips Collection. But it also represents a real commitment of real estate in the museum. It does take up a room, but it embraces, just like Duncan Phillips did with our Mark Rothko chamber, something permanent, a bold statement in a museum defined by our rotating of the permanent collection every 3 months. Being located in Washington, D.C., we are not immune to the political climate of today's day and age. So we recently featured in January a work by Georgia Saxelby, who is a fellow at the Halcyon Art and Innovation Incubator, a sister institution nearby. She actually approached the Phillips Collection to do this collaboration. She designed chairs and a wall where people would post letters that they would write to future women, imagining these women 20 years from now. The Phillips has promised to archive and then display these letters in 20 years. It's participatory, political, and poignant. And on Valentine's Day, while tragedy was happening in other parts of the United States, the Phillips hosted a panel of activists and authors, driving the imagination of a broader and younger population. We also engage in cultural diplomacy. Some of our partnerships were initiated by the State Department. One of our educators, Rachel Goldberg, who you can see in the slide on the left, traveled to Islamabad and Lahore, Pakistan, to create art inspired by Jacob Lawrence's migration series. She also did a similar program in Bosnia on the 50th anniversary of the Dayton Accord. So we're sort of leveraging who we are in terms of a global conversation and doing everything we can to reach beyond the walls of our museum in Washington, D.C. We've also brought other artists to us. This is a mural that's painted on the back wall of the museum, so it's not facing the front, the main road. But we brought in a group of Senegalese artists as part of the State Department's Art and Embassies program. The mural is still up, it's very dynamic, and it is increasing our territory beyond our walls once again. As I mentioned before, innovative partnerships that mutually benefit the museum and its sister institutions have become a hallmark of the Phillips Collection's programming. The University of Maryland Center for Art and Knowledge is housed in the carriage house behind the museum, facing the Senegalese mural, actually. There we host a number of postdoctoral fellows, one in art history and then one in visual culture. So the Phillips is expanding its interests into the world of digital art history and digital humanities, as well as traditional art historical pursuits. There we also host classes for undergraduates and graduate students and provide opportunities for students to present their research on a larger scale. We also partner with the David Driscoll Center, based at the University of Maryland. It's the Center for the Study of African American Art and Culture. And here we have a slide in the center of Curly Holton, who's the director of the Driscoll Center, in dialogue with Sanford Biggers, a major African American artist who is currently in Rome at the American Academy. Our conservation department also is very accurate, and they've been doing a lot of cutting-edge research using the most cutting-edge technology that's available to them in their pursuits. Education has always been a strength of the Phillips's robust public interface, reaching diverse communities within and beyond the museum's walls. Here we see a group of students from the Washington School for Girls. They're acting out a performance piece reacting to Jacob Lawrence's migration series. Jacob Lawrence was a major African American artist who created a 60-panel work of art describing the African American migration from the agrarian South to the industrial North. We only have 30 of the panels on site at the Phillips Collection, and the other 30 live at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So we're just as involved in bringing students in just as we are as going out beyond our walls. Our PRISM K-12 strategy is an innovative teaching tool that K-12 teachers can create arts-integrated curriculum. So using suggested lesson plans that our educators have created, educators in other schools around the world can integrate arts into their classes, whether it's a humanities course, a science course, or a math course. This is also all available online, so we're reaching around the world as well. We've recently stepped up our focus on engaging underserved communities in our backyard. Ward 8 is a traditionally African American and low-income neighborhood located on the other side of the Anacostia River in Washington, D.C. It's geographically separated from the predominantly wealthy, white DuPont Circle neighborhood that the Phillips Collection occupies. We have partnered with a group called the Arc to open a storefront educational space, essentially serving as a living room where Boys and Girls Clubs, the Levine School of Music, K-12 groups, and local schools can bring students for arts integrated learning. We also work with Turner Elementary School, which is a half block away. So our educators are not only working in our museum, they're working in different neighborhoods as well. We're trying to reinvent what it means for a museum to work in the community. And we realized that in order to be the most effective, we needed to reach beyond our comfort zone. So besides work with schools on arts integration, we're also creating spaces for local artists to share their work. You can actually see a small photo montage in this slide here on the left, created by an artist from the Anacostia community on America's first African American yacht club, which was located right in Washington, D.C., exemplifying our effort to engage the talent of the community to document its own stories. This is a slide of some of our firsts, a point of pride for us, which we try to keep alive and going each day. The Wax Room is featured on a contemplation audio tour, thinking back to Duncan Phillips' first ideas about the museum as a space for healing and mindfulness. People can access the tour using their cell phone and follow guided meditation with stops in different works of art throughout the collection, adding a new dimension and synesthetic aspect to viewing art while also maintaining our legacy of innovation. In the center, you'll see our clay room, which sometimes we reassemble. Right now, we're actually featuring an exhibition that we co-organized with the Clay Center in Bern, Switzerland. So who are we? We look forward, but always with an eye to our past. We're very active on social media, all platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest. We've hosted tweet-ups inviting major Twitter influencers from Washington, D.C. to basically tweet sneak previews of exhibitions, generating buzz online that we can translate into more visitors. You'll see here another image of Arlene Sheckett on the top left, who's actually smelling Lieb's beeswax, so she's installing her work of art. So engaging with former artworks while working on her own work. We also host a very robust music program housed in the 1897 House Building's music room. This is an image from the 77th anniversary of Glenn Gould's US debut. And we like to let our art go beyond the walls as well. So you'll see Xavier Vaillan's sculpture of a red bear that's located on the corner of 21st and Q Street. It welcomed lots of visitors into the museum for years. And finally, we see more visitors enjoying a work by Augustus Vincent Tack. These images capture the multiplicity of what we're doing, a balance between our legacy and tomorrow. We always ask the fundamental questions: how do you be creatively respectful to the legacy collection? How do we energize the founder's original intent? We do this through collecting. Duncan Phillips, though he started out bravely positioning American modernism as important when many art historians looked down on it, likely today would accept the idea that modern and contemporary art is not a solely Western phenomenon. We will continue to feature and champion local and global contemporary artists. We will continue to foster innovative partnerships to leverage resources and set down deeper roots in the community, both in Washington, D.C. and beyond. And finally, we are committed to diversity and inclusion, reaching out to underserved populations to bring them into the museum. These four main tenets are integral to shaping our next 100 years. Thank you.